Avast, ye sea dogs! What happened when Japanese pirates met up with English pirates in the 16th century? Greetings, everyone. So this is going to be another installment looking at historical records and actual period accounts talking about combat. And specifically, this is a follow-up on the series where we were talking about Katana versus Rapier. And I promised last time that I would continue looking into sources to see if we could find one of those golden, perfect encounters where we're talking about sword on sword. And I have come very, very close. Now, this is not exactly what we were looking for. This is not one swordsman versus another swordsman. This is not a duel between a samurai and a frilly, gentleman who's well heeled with handkerchiefs coming out of his sleeves. This is not even a set piece battle between a whole bunch of samurai and a whole bunch of another European army. Instead, this is a pirate battle, and it's not just any pirate battle. It's Japanese pirates versus English pirates. So this is a messy, scrummy affair. But unlike most accounts where it just says, and we got into a fight and then some guys died, this gets into it a little bit. So this talks about weapons and it talks about the actual details of the encounter a little bit more than most of what you read in the period. And I thought it was worth mentioning. This is something that I had read 20 years ago in a library, and I've tried to track it down for a long time, and we've finally found it. So it's coming from a book that details the life of an English navigator. So this particular book is called The Voyages and Works of John Davis, the Navigator. So John Davis was an English navigator born right smack in the middle of the 16th century. And he got to do all sorts of amazing things. He helped discover the Falkland Islands. He spent a lot of time going, doing what we would call circumnavigation, trying to explore areas like the Northwest Passage, going around the Cape Horn, Cape of Good Hope. So exploring all sorts of the seas in this amazing age of exploration. And so he is going to pair up with another character that we're going to find out about named Edward Michelborne. And so Edward Michelborne is a captain, and more importantly, he is what is going to be called an interloper. So this is a period of time where the East India Company owns all of the trade, especially in the area where we're talking about, so in Southeastern Asia. And as we're about to find out, we'll read through the introduction, but he is going to have the opportunity to make his own independent business outside of the monopoly that the East India Company has, and that's going to cause all sorts of trouble. So the two of them are going to team up and go on this adventure that is unfortunately not going to end very well for them. So we're going to read the account, and mind you, even though this account is in English, which is how I'm able to read it to everyone, but keep that in mind. So just like we've seen before with some of the other accounts, there's always at least two sides to every story. This is going to be told from the English perspective, and while I think it is perhaps slightly more fair than some other accounts from the period, it is still going to be biased. If we look at, for example, some of the summaries from these European versus Japanese accounts that my friend Gunsen History has been tabulating, he points out that the conflicts from 1561 that arose in Kyushu, if we look at the comparison between how they are told from the European side and how they're told on the Japanese side, they are different. And the Japanese sides tend to be a little bit more concise and a little bit more neutral in their telling compared to how the Europeans discuss things. So while we're going through that, just keep that in mind. This is being told through the lens of history, after the fact, and from the perspective of someone who's trying to portray a certain version of events. Okay, so we're going to set the stage a little bit talking about John Davis and Edward Michelborne and how they're about to depart on their ship. Okay, let's see how our adventurers are about to start out. It is evident that Sir Edward Michelborne had a good deal of influence at court. We see the Lord Treasurer pressing the company to appoint him to command their first voyage. On June 25th, 1604, James I, regardless of the charter giving exclusive rights to the East India Company, granted a license to Michelborne, one of the gentlemen pensioners, to discover and trade with Cathay and Japan, notwithstanding any grant or charter to the contrary. Accordingly, the courtly adventurer equipped a vessel called the Tiger of 240 tons, with a pinnace named the Tiger's Well, and John Davis accepted the appointment of pilot. This was his second voyage to the East Indies in an English vessel, and the third counting his Dutch service. So he had previously gone out working for the Dutch. And this explains that Edward Michelborne is now horning in on the monopoly of the East India Company, because again, they had exclusive rights to trade in that area, and James I is granting him a charter, which is making him what is called an interloper. So he now has permission by the king to be able to go and discover and trade with these other countries, so Japan, Korea, China, and engage in commerce with them directly outside of the purview of the East India Company. That is what the plan is. In practice, what we are going to find is he engages mostly in piracy. He just starts finding ships and plundering them, taking their booty, and going on the way, causing all sorts of headaches to the folks who are operating out there, the EIC. So this is part of the trouble that they end up getting into out in Asia. Before he sailed on his last voyage, John Davis made his will. It would appear that his wife was dead and that he was engaged to be married to one Judith Harvard, if he should be spared to return home once more. But this was not to be. Foreshadowing. So the brave old navigator arranged his earthly affairs and bade farewell to his 3 sons and his espoused love, whom he was never to see again. His age was 55. The Tiger set sail from Cowes on the 5th of December 1604 and made a prosperous voyage to the west coast of Sumatra. The narrative, as given by Purchas, was not written by either Michelborne or by Davis, for both are mentioned several times in the third person. The writer uses the first person plural and latterly the first person singular. His name does not appear, but he was apparently the master of the ship, Michelborne being the general and Davis being the pilot. Davis wrote sailing directions for the Sumatran coast from Ankin to Tiku and Perimen, based on the experience obtained during 3 voyages. So they're setting the stage for what we're about to read, the first-hand account. So the first-hand account is written by someone else who is apparently a master of ship. And again, please keep in mind, I am not a general military historian nor a naval historian by any means. So if I stumble over any of these terms, or if anyone who's listening can shed any more light on the period we're discussing or the events surrounding it, please feel free to comment and add to what we're about to read. All right, so with that background underway, let's get into the actual account of what happens. The account starts December 27th of 1604. And again, this is some other member, unnamed member, writing about both John Davis and Edward Michelborne. It begins. Here I stood for Patney about the 27th of December, and I met with a junk of the Japans, the Japanese, who had been pirating along the coast of China and Cambodia. Their pilot being dead, with ignorance and foul weather, they had cast away their ship on the shoals of the great island Borneo, and to enter into the country of Borneo they durst not, for the Japans are not suffered to land in any port in India with weapons, being accounted a people so desperate and daring that they are feared in all places where they come. Now, this is echoing things we've heard from other writers in the area. I think they'll make reference to it a few more times here, but we see this in Spanish accounts, we see this in Dutch accounts. The Japanese who are not in Japan, so either they're Ronins or pirates or expatriated Japanese, one way or another, that are operating out of Southeastern Asia, whether they're in the Philippines, whether they're in Java or Malaysia, they are, for whatever reason, given very high regard. So sometimes they're hired out as mercenaries, but other times they are just considered a very perhaps dangerous people, and they are not permitted to, let's say, walk into town unless they are first they first put away their weapons. That doesn't seem to be true for other foreigners who come into town or for the locals. So it's something that seems very specific to the Japanese. And again, mind you, we're not talking about samurai here. These are some other type of ne'er-do-wells. We'll just refer to them as pirates. What wako is a complicated term, but we'll just call them Japanese pirates for the purposes of discussion. These people, their ships being splitted with their shallops, entered this junk wherein I met them, which was of Patne, and killed all the people save one old pilot. This junk was laden with rice, which, when they had possessed and furnished with such furniture, necessaries and arms, as they saved out of their sunken ship, they shaped their course for Japan, but their badness of their junk, contrary winds, and unsensibleness of the year forced them leeward, which was the cause of mine unluck meeting them. After I had healed them and made them come to leeward, hailed them, sending my boat aboard them, I found them by their men and furniture very unportionable for such a ship as they were in, which was a junk not above 70 ton in birth, and they were 90 men, and most of them in too gallant a habit for sailors, and such an equality of behavior among them that they seemed all fellows. Yet one among them there was that they called captain, but gave him little respect. I caused them to come to an anchor, and upon further examination I found their landing to be only rice, and for the most part spilt with wet, for their ship was leaked both under and above water. Upon questioning them, I understood them to be men of war that had pillaged on the coast of China and Cambodia, and, as I said before, had cast away their ship on the shoals of Borneo. Here we rode at anchor under a small island near to the Isle of Bhutan, 2 days entertaining them with good usage, not taking anything from them, thinking to have gathered by their knowledge the place and passage of certain ships on the coast of China to have made my voyage. So they find these 90-something Japanese pirates that have run aground near Sumatra. Their ship is full of rice, it's cracked, and they come upon them, and they're trying to befriend them and maybe gather some intelligence with them. But these rogues, being desperate in winds and fortunes, being hopeless in their paltry junk ever to return to their country, resolved with themselves either to gain my ship or to lose their lives. The Japanese pirates have different ideas. And upon mutual courtesies, with gifts and feasting between us, sometimes 5 and 20 or 6 and 20 of their chiefest came aboard. So, a quarter of the Japanese came on board them. Whereof I would not suffer above 6 to have weapons. So he's limiting how many come on board with their weapons. There was never the like number of our men aboard their junk, so they didn't send too many on the Japanese ship. I willed Captain John Davis in the morning to possess himself of their weapons, take away their weapons, and put the company before mast, and to leave some guard on their weapons while they searched in the rice, doubting that by searching and finding that which would dislike them, they might suddenly set upon my men and put them to the sword, as the sequel proved. So their guys, the Englishmen, are going over there and they're looking through the rice just in case they might have buried treasure or something in the junk. And he says, "Hey, disarm these Japanese pirates, or set a guard, put men out, have everyone ready to go in case these guys decide to cause trouble." Captain Davis, being beguiled by their humble semblance, would not possess himself of their weapons. Let's not take their weapons from them. Though I sent twice of purpose from my ship to will him to do it. So from one boat to the other boat, please take their weapons. They passed all the day, my men searching in the rice, and they looking on. And the sun setting after long search, and nothing found save a little storax and Benjamin. Not sure what those are. I suspect spices. They, seeing opportunity, and talking to the rest of their company, which were in my ship, being near to their junk, they resolved at a watchword between them to set upon us resolutely in both ships. So someone said the magic word, and boom, here come the pirates. This being concluded, they suddenly killed and drove overboard all my men that were in their ship, and those which were aboard my ship sallied out of my cabin, where they were with such weapons as they had, finding certain targets in my cabin and other things that they used as weapons. So everyone on the writer's ship came out of the cabin and had whatever weapons they had at hand. Now, it doesn't explicitly say here what weapons they had other than targets. So they had some type of small shield. In previous writings in this book, they have mentioned swords, they have mentioned spears, they have mentioned hand pistols and aquaburses. They have mentioned even two-handed swords, but they have been on different travels, so it's a little unclear what they may have on this journey or on this particular ship. So they may have axes, they may have clubs, who knows? It says just that they have targets and they have whatever weapons they probably got on the moment's notice, since no one was on guard and no one was prepared to do battle. Myself, being aloft on the deck, knowing what was likely to follow, leapt into the waist, where with the boatswain's, carpenter, and some few more, we kept them under the half deck. So they jumped down and they're trying to keep everyone under control. At their first coming forth of the cabin, they met Captain Davis coming out of the gun room, who they pulled into the cabin, and giving him 6 or 7 mortal wounds, they thrust him out of the cabin before them. His wounds were so mortal that he died as soon as he came into the waist. So there goes the end of the book for poor Captain Davis. He didn't keep his wits about him. He tried to befriend these Japanese pirates, and they immediately stabbed or cut him to death. They pressed so fiercely to come to us as we received them on our pikes. So at some point, someone got a whole bunch of pikes. So let me read that passage again. They pressed so fiercely to come to us as we received them on our pikes, they would gather our pikes with their hands to reach us with their swords. So here you go. Apparently, someone had the wherewithal to get pikes. And again, we've seen before that pikes were used on ships from this point all the way through the late age of sail. So even into the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, boarding pikes were something that were used. And here's very interesting point. So they have pikes and they're using them to try and repel the Japanese pirates. But apparently their attack is so fierce that the writer is commenting that they are storming them even with these long pole arms and trying to get at them with their swords. So this is interesting. This is apparently something a little out of the ordinary that they aren't expecting. to have happen with the opponents. There was nary half an hour before we could stone them back into the cabin, in which time we had killed 3 or 4 of their leaders. So despite having potentially better arms, and despite all of this fighting, it sounds like they did not do much damage to the Japanese attackers. This is different than we've seen on some of the other European accounts, where if we read the European account compared to the Japanese account, it usually shows way more fatalities, like, oh, we killed hundreds of the Japanese. And then you read the Japanese accounts and they say there were no Japanese fatalities, or there was like 4 Japanese fatalities. Here it says we killed 3 or 4. Well, it does say of their leaders, so maybe he's suggesting that they were only targeting the folks in charge, or that's all he was interested in recording. After they were driven into the cabin, they fought with us at the least 4 hours before we could suppress them, often frying the cabin, burning the bedding, and much other stuff that was there. And had we not the 2 culverings from the half deck beaten down the bulkhead and the pump of the ship, we could not have suppressed them from burning the ship. This ordnance, being charged with crossbars, bullets, and case-shot, and bent close to the bulkhead, so violently marred therewith boards and splinters that it left but one of them standing, and of 22. So there were 22 Japanese that had boarded themselves up in the cabin, had started setting everything on fire, and had fought them for 4 hours, and eventually they managed to bring a cannon to bear on them. They stuffed it full of bullets and case shots and all sorts of things, and they just blew a hole straight through them and killed all but one of them, and just tore them to pieces, apparently. Their legs, arms, and bodies were so torn as it was strange to see how the shot had massacred them. In all this conflict, they never would desire their lives, though they were hopeless to escape. Such was the desperateness of these Japonians. Only one leapt overboard, which afterwards swam to our ship again and asked for grace. We took him in and asked him what was their purpose. He told us they meant to take our ship and to cut all our throats. Okay, he's honest. He would say no more, but desired that he might be cut to pieces. Okay, so he's like, just chop me up. The next day, to wit, the end and 20th of December, so 28th of December, we went a little to land and to the leeward off of it, and when we were about 5 miles from land, the general commanded his people to hang this Japonian, and he broke the rope and he fell into the sea. I cannot tell whether he swam to land or not. And thus ends our account of pirate on pirate action. So, what can we take away from this? So, obviously, this was a huge miscalculation by the English pirates. They had warning. They seemed to know ahead of time that everyone treated the Japanese pirates with a sense of respect, even within the cultures that were operating around them. They gave them way too much leeway because they were greedy. They wanted to try and take the treasure from them. They saw them as another fat target that they could take advantage of, and then somehow the Japanese decided to they figured out a signal and they decided to activate, and they stormed the English ship all at the same time. So we do hear that they were using swords. We don't hear anything else that the pirates were armed with. It sounds like they very quickly assaulted at least one of the captains and just killed him outright, and they were happy to basically fight to the end, which is something that we do see kind of again and again. It's something that comes up in these online debates as to, is that something that is actually true about the mindset of Japanese swordsmen or not? And it's usually in the context of how would a samurai conduct himself in in light of meeting up with, you know, a European knight or rider or military man. These are not formally trained bushi. These are not folks from the mainland who are serving a daimyo. These are the dregs of society. These are lowlifes who have not seen their homeland in quite some time. So it's interesting that even so, they are portraying a sort of fatalistic fight to the last man, win at all costs sort of ferocity that is astounding even the English pirates. And again, even when they're at the end of the long spears, the pikes, they're still willing to do everything they can to offend the Englishmen with their katana. So it's not katana versus rapier quite, but it's as close as we've found so far, and it left a lasting impression on the English, and it cost a bunch of them their lives. So not necessarily. I don't think you could call it a Japanese win. It's not. It's uneven sort of terrain or uneven sort of arms, but a very interesting encounter to see how these pirates scrum against one another in in a really messy sort of brawl back in the late, I said 16th century. This is actually the very turn of the 17th century. So one more encounter for the record books. Hope everyone found it interesting. Until next time, guys. Take care.